It's not the first time our capital has been under attack. It happened in 1812. It happened in 1861. It happened on 9/11. But this is the first time terrorists have attacked our capital with the support of a president and much of his party. The leaders of this terrorist attack: Donald Trump, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, Kevin McCarthy. We elected them to protect us. They betrayed us. Hold them responsible.
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Good evening and welcome to The Breakdown. I'm Tara Setmayer. This is the Rick Wilson. And last night we gathered here to hash out the disgraceful display that we saw, the insurrection attack on the U.S. Capitol. And we were really glad that we were able to kind of go through that together. And we appreciate all of our Lincoln Project supporters and viewers for joining us for that show last night. I think it was cathartic for all of us. And the feedback from our viewers was wonderful, knowing that we gave them some solace and that they felt that they were supported by the myriad of emotions that everyone was going through. So we're glad we were able to bring that to you, and you guys could kvetch with us, and we all went through it together. So thank you for being with us last night. As enraging and upsetting as everything is, here we are the next day, and the fallout from yesterday is taking place in real time. In the early hours last night, despite the attack on the Capitol, the Congress was able to reconvene and officially certify Joe Biden's election, and he will be taking the oath of office on January 20th at 12 o'clock. As we have been telling you for weeks, it will happen. It's official. It is over. Donald Trump today came out and gave another one of his signature hostage teleprompter Trump videos, acknowledging for the first time, actually, that he lost the election. It wasn't a full concession, but it was interesting. And Rick, before we get into it, I think we should let people hear what Donald Trump said to them earlier this evening.
Indeed.
Like all Americans, I am outraged by the violence, lawlessness, and mayhem. I immediately deployed the National Guard and federal law enforcement to secure the building and expel the intruders. A new administration will be inaugurated on January 20th. My focus now turns to ensuring a smooth, orderly, and seamless transition of power. This moment calls for healing and reconciliation. 2020 has been a challenging time for our people.
What is there to say? I mean, maybe the fact that there were mass resignations happening, threats of the 25th Amendment removal, Pelosi talking about reintroducing articles of impeachment, armed insurrection taking place in Capitol grounds. Maybe somebody talked to him and said, "You got to say something better than what you did yesterday." I don't know, Rick. I think it's because Twitter suspended his account, and that was the only way he could get it back.
I don't know if there were two hostages out of the White House today. The first woman, second was
Did we lose Rick?
who came like she had been run away. And guys, you got me?
We've got you now. You're a little spotty, but I think you were talking about as you resolve that, you were talking about the statement today from that mendacious twit, Kayleigh McEnany, where it was supposed to be a press conference, ended up just being a statement where she said that Trump quickly responded and they were just protecting the election, which was a bunch of BS. And we all know that he did not quickly respond. The reports are out there. He sat back and watched the fire that he lit burn with glee. He was quote, enthusiastic, which is what the report was.
Yes.
Governor Hogan, came out and said, Governor Hogan of Maryland said that there was a 90-minute delay. He was willing to send his National Guard troops. Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia, where I live, he was willing to send troops, and there was a lot of chaos around that. Like, he got a personal phone call from Nancy Pelosi. He was in the middle of giving a coronavirus task force update. It was chaos. So, I'm sorry, but that half-assed statement from Donald Trump reading a teleprompter, very odd, bizarre. I think you said earlier it was like Donald Trump on Xanax times 10, does not absolve him from his responsibilities prior to that. All right, Rick is still frozen. So in the meantime,
Not in this.
we have a lot to unpack, and tonight we have some great guests for you guys. We have Congresswoman Jackie Speier here, who's going to tell us what it was like during all that chaos yesterday. She was in the House chamber when all hell broke loose, so she's with us to talk about that. We also have counterterrorism and homeland security expert Erroll Southers to join us to talk about what the hell happened with the security breakdown yesterday and what the implications of that are moving forward. And then also Professor Ruth Ben Giat, who's the author of the book Strongman. She is an expert on authoritarianism, and she's going to talk to us about what we saw yesterday and how that fits into the authoritarian playbook. She wrote an excellent book, Strongman. It's fantastic. You should read it. So tonight, of course, we want to hear from you. Usually we do live callers, but we have an action-packed show with lots of guests. So tonight we're just going to take your tweets. So send us your questions at hashtag #AskTheBreakdown. That's hashtag #AskTheBreakdown, and we will pull some of your questions and answer them throughout the show. Rick, are you back with me, my friend? now you're muted. The internet gremlins. The internet gremlins have been invading Rick Wilson's internet. We hear you now.
Come on. You got me? All right, good.
We hear you, but now, now we don't see you.
It's probably best you didn't hear the last 30 seconds. Luckily, we're a streaming show at this point, folks. Luckily, we're streaming only because the word, well, never mind. Yeah, but it has been a consequential day following another consequential day, and this has certainly been a testing and challenging moment. And I think what you're seeing right now with these mass resignations in the administration of the White House, this drop off of even people loyalists like Betsy DeVos tonight leaving.
Who cares?
A friend of mine just emailed me that. Right, who cares? But the collapse is proceeding apace. And right now we're getting to that third world dictator phase where he's the last guy sitting wearing nothing but a loincloth on a throne while the city burns around him and the last of his concubines have fled into the wilderness. It's getting ugly.
Image.
So
thank you for that horrible
he better
image.
prepare his evac. Well, yesterday I gave people a horrible image of Steve Bannon in a tub of pudding. So I will say this was less horrific than that idea.
Well, on that note, I think we should bring in our first guest tonight. I'm sure she's thinking to herself, what have I gotten myself into coming on the show? Congresswoman Jackie Speier represents California's 14th congressional district. We're thrilled to have you. Fabulous necklace, by the way. Welcome, Congresswoman.
Thank you, Tara. Nice to be with you as well.
Thank you so much. So you were there yesterday, and just take us through a little bit about how you felt when you realized you were under siege here, and what happened.
Well, first I watched as the speaker was taken out of the chamber, which is not unusual, but there was a certainty in which she was moving quickly. And then shortly thereafter, Steny Hoyer was escorted out. And then I knew something was up. So then the sergeant of the Capitol Police came to the microphone and said, the Capitol has been breached. And we all thought, okay. So we're sitting in the gallery. He says, stay seated. A few minutes later, he said, there's a pouch under your seat. Now, I've been in the gallery many times. I didn't know there were pouches under the seats. But he asked us to take out the pouch, unzip it, and to activate the mask. So it was a tear gas mask. And then we were moved a little bit, then we were moved back. It was very chaotic. We were getting orders from different Capitol Police officers. They finally locked all of the doors on the third floor. All the members that had been on the House floor had been escorted out. And then they had to move very quickly around to the other side of the gallery. And then the banging on the door of the chamber began. And they brought a piece of furniture over to secure the door. Then the glass was broken. Some of the police officers took their guns and pointed them at the rioters. We were told to lay down. So I was on the marble floor behind another seat in front of me. And then I heard another, a gun go off. And you may not know my history.
So you heard that.
So
you heard the gunshot. The
yes.
gunshot that went off. Wow, that's extraordinary. And you also saw the guns drawn. So that was the point where I worked in Capitol Hill. I actually worked for a congressman in the California delegation, and I know that area well. I know the Capitol well, the House Gallery. When I watched that still frame come in with the guns drawn, with the furniture up against the door, the glass broken, and the rioters peering in, that sent absolute chills down my spine, because I just could not imagine something like that happening in 2021 in America. And I can't imagine what that was like for you.
Well, it felt like we were under siege. And I, 42 years ago, I was shot in Jonestown, Guyana. So I have an experience of living with gunfire. And I'm lying there, and after the gun was shot, I laid my cheek on that cold marble and thought, we're sitting ducks. And, waited, and then they wanted us to move to another door, but there was pounding on that door. So they had now breached the third floor of the Capitol. So we waited, and then a short while later, we were told to go out that door. As we walked out that door, I looked to my right, there were all of these protesters, rioters, face down on the floor with Capitol Police with their assault weapons pointed at them. So they had secured the third floor, and then we went down many staircases to a secure area.
Rick, do I have you?
It's a little choppy, but Congresswoman Spears, I mean, you obviously, this is something very evocative for you, something that's very compelling for you. Did the other members of the House, including your Republican colleagues, did they understand that this was something well beyond just onesie twosie? You've all had somebody in the gallery yelling at you at some point. Did they understand that this was a whole different level? That this was something that was well beyond a minor protest or a minor thing? Did they understand the risk that they faced at that moment?
Well, there were no Republicans in the gallery, so they had all been escorted out. Okay. So I don't know if they felt the same angst that all of us did, because they had police protection and they were out.
Okay. Congresswoman, you mentioned in passing that you were at the Jim Jones massacre many decades ago, and I don't think a lot of our audience is familiar with that story. You were a young staffer for an assemblyman, I believe, congressional California, and who went down there to investigate what the hell was going on with the Jim Jones cult. And you guys were fired upon. A journalist was killed. People were killed. It was terrible, and you survived. You were shot and you survived. So you have a chilling, intimate familiarity with cults.
I do.
Do you see any similarities in this rabid, cultish following with Donald Trump? Because I've been calling it a cult for years.
You know, I wrote my memoir 2 years ago called Undaunted. And when I was on a book tour, one of the very first questions I was asked was, do you think there's a comparison between Donald Trump and Jim Jones? And I kind of recoiled from it because I thought, well, but as time has gone on, there are many similarities. One's a political cult. One was a religious cult. They both have charismatic leaders. They demand full and complete respect, control, admiration, control over what they say and do. And they have one interest and one interest only, and that is being in charge and controlling the lives of others.
It's incredible. I don't think that
Fantastic.
anyone ever thought we'd be talking about something like that, because I said it was a cult, and then after the way they handled COVID, I said it's a death cult now, and it's remarkable. Go ahead, Rick.
Now, Congresswoman, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Capitol Police, who I worked as an aide in the first Bush administration. I was at the Capitol a lot. I've been in and out of it with friends and clients and issues over the years, many, hundreds and hundreds of times. And I guess it's a balancing act between it being accessible to the people who are there for legitimate, purposes, and this. I mean, we need to reconsider in this era of violent Trumpism the access to the Capitol grounds itself. I mean, this is a kind of a wake up call, I think, because these people were frightening but largely disorganized. I mean, a group without leadership is a mob. But if that was a led operation, if someone had organized it more thoroughly, more effectively, there could have been a very bad outcome that day. There were people there with pipe bombs, Molotov cocktails, handguns, handcuffs, zip ties. And this was not, I don't think what they wanted to happen happened. But if it had, it would have been a horrific moment. Do we need to reconsider the security of the Capitol itself right now?
Without a doubt. But also the leadership of Capitol Police, which is now going to change because the captain has decided to retire. But I will say that there was an irony that every time I come into the Capitol grounds, if I'm in a car, the car has to be stopped. A dog comes and sniffs the car before I can go in. And yet here we had mobs of people who wanted to create an absolute act of tyranny on our country, and they were just walking in. I mean, at one point, and I'm sure you've seen the video, one of the police officers just opened the barrier and let them in.
Yeah, it was outrageous.
Unbelievable.
Outrageous. And I tweeted today about how, and I spent 7 years up on Capitol Hill and used to interact with Capitol Police all the time, and they were wonderful, and I befriended many. And we knew when somebody's birthday was, or if someone was having a bad day, you get to know these guys at the checkpoints. You see them all the time, and there was never any point where I ever doubted their capabilities. And after seeing what took place yesterday, it has really had me it shook my confidence in the Capitol Police in many ways. And I come from a law enforcement family, as our viewers know, and it pains me to admit how the failures were so grave. Before we let you go, Congresswoman, we're thankful for your time. It's been a week. How should Trump be held accountable here in these final days? There's been a lot going on, talking about impeachment, the 25th Amendment, censure, worried about how to restrain him, what the hell could happen in the next 13 days. What do you think should happen moving forward?
Well, the most efficient and effective act that should take place is to have Vice President Pence invoke the 25th Amendment. And if more of the members of the cabinet resign, he'll have a smaller universe for which to get to 51%, and it takes effect immediately. And then the president has the opportunity to challenge that. But meanwhile, Vice President Pence is the acting president. And the Congress then would have to act, and by a 3/4 majority of both houses, sustain the act by the vice president. And I think that would be sustained.
Do you think it's possible?
Question.
Pence is saying no. Go ahead, Rick.
I do think that we need to draft articles of impeachment. This was an act of insurrection. It was an act of terrorism, and he needs to be held accountable.
To ask you one last question, is that would you vote for articles of impeachment in this matter? I think I have my answer. So,
In fact, I have now co-authored 2 resolutions. I'm also asking the speaker to convene a commission, one commission, much like the 9/11 commission, to look at the security issues, because I think they go much deeper than just having one of our internal committees look at it. And then a second commission to look at violent extremism in this country. The people that were there were people hell-bent on destroying this democracy by creating anarchy. They were anti-Semitic. They were clearly racially motivated and racist. And I think there's probably much more.
That is fantastic to hear. I think we're all in agreement that there does need to be a thorough investigation into what happened yesterday on multiple levels. There were failures, and we're grateful that you all are safe and saddened by the loss of life otherwise, but it could have been a whole hell of a lot worse. And thank God it wasn't. Thank you so much for your great work. We will be following how far that goes. We hope Speaker Pelosi brings those articles of impeachment, impeach that bastard again, as far as I'm concerned, let it go down in the history books and let him not be able to run for any office ever again. That's what I say. And we appreciate all the good work you've done. Congresswoman Speier, 14th District of California, thank you so much, and stay safe.
Thank you. And thank you for the Lincoln Project. God bless the Lincoln Project.
We're trying our best here. That's actually a good segue into our next guest, because we're going to talk about the security failures and things. But first, I think we're going to take a look at our recap for those who haven't been paying attention to what's happened in the last day. Let's take a look at the recap.
CNN will now project that Democrat Raphael Warnock is elected to the U.S. Senate.
Today, though, we're going to see a very contentious counting of the Electoral College votes in Congress.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote?
I rise up for myself and 60 of my colleagues to object.
We're going to the Capitol. We're going to try and give our Republicans the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country.
Let's have trial by combat.
Protesters are in the building.
Thank you. Pro-Trump loyalists have stormed the Senate floor now. This is an enormous security nightmare.
I don't have an explanation of their failure, but there was a friggin' failure.
I want to know from the Capitol Hill Police, why do you scream at people for walking across the street, but then Trump supporters come in and you open the fucking doors for them?
In their minds, they own this country, they own that Capitol, they own the cops work for them, and people like me have no damn right to try to elect a president.
Where's the Homeland Security Secretary? Where's the acting Attorney General? Where's anybody in a role of federal leadership?
We love you. You're very special.
We have a death toll of 4 after this violence today.
At 3:41 a.m. Eastern Time, Mike Pence said those magic words that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have the votes necessary to be sworn in as president and vice president of the United States.
Rick, earlier in the week, you tweeted out that it was going to be a week and to strap in, and good grief, that was just 24 hours.
and you know, I'm not just Rick Stradamus on most of these things. This exceeded even my grisly expectations of how bad it would get. And I think it's important to remember that this week is one more thing. I wrote about it in the Daily Beast today. This is, he turned the Capitol into a set of his shitty reality show. And no matter how constrained he feels right now by people resigning or people leaving or people retiring, Donald Trump still at some fundamental level is like a rat in a cage. He will always try to find the way, the space between the bars we can slide his fat ass through. He's always going to try to find a way out of the problem. He's always going to try to hack his way into recognition and attention, and so he will keep trying to do this as we go forward. And it's just important to remember it's only 13 days, folks. We're going to hold fast for 13 days. We're going to get through this, but expect more fuckery from this president.
I think yesterday qualified as a fire hose of fuckery, as we've talked about in the past, and how much more of that we see between now and then is anyone's guess and everyone's concern, and which is why we are all kind of waiting with bated breath for these 13 days to go by and for January 20th to hurry up and freaking get here. Okay, let's bring in our. I know, please. Let's bring in our next guest. Erroll Southers is an internationally recognized expert on counterterrorism, public safety, infrastructure protection, and homeland security. He is the director of the Safe Communities Institute at the University of Southern California, where he is also a professor of the practice in national and homeland security. He has also a serious law enforcement cred. He's not just really smart, he's also a badass too. He served as a police officer, a special agent with the FBI, as deputy director in the California Office of Homeland Security, and as chief of Homeland Security and Intelligence for the nation's largest airport police department. I'd say he's qualified to talk about this conversation next. Welcome, Dr. Southers.
Thank you for having me, and thank you.
It's almost like you're an expert.
Right.
Thank you.
It's almost like you know what the hell you're talking about. Unlike me, I just make it up as I go along.
Oh my goodness. Dr. Southers, what was your reaction to what you saw yesterday, coming from your perspective as a law enforcement expertise in these areas? What were you thinking?
Well, the first thing I was thinking is that you've got one of the most secure facilities in our country compromised in a matter of minutes by people who are largely, as Rick mentioned, unorganized and most probably on a majority unarmed. So what it did for me was bring back memories of 2017 when we had the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally and how the intelligence for that event was ignored. And how could you not know what was going to happen on the 6th of this month? There's an organization called Advanced Democracy. They are a global research organization, and the online chatter, much like before Charlottesville, was off the charts. And if I may, at our center, we have a saying, it's if you don't have data, you're just somebody with an opinion. So let me just give you some information. On Twitter, the post suggested that the protests armed themselves on Wednesday because it was going to be Independence Day. On TikTok, hundreds of thousands of views promoted the violence at the rally, told them to carry firearms, even though we all know that in the district, firearms and open carry is not permitted. On Parler, thousands of posts, including hashtags regarding the Second Civil War. There were calls for violence in the top 5 comments on more than half the posts discussing congressional certification of the votes. And most importantly, the online threats targeted both Democrats and Republicans identified as traitors for acknowledging the election results. So there's no way, and all of that being an open source, that law enforcement could not have had that information and been prepared.
So what do you think happened? Where was how did it come to pass that way?
I think the same thing that happened in Charlottesville, that happened this summer with Black Lives Matter, happened again yesterday. Depending on who's outside exercising their alleged, in this case Wednesday, their alleged First Amendment rights gets treated very differently. We all have the images on social media about how they stood up at the Lincoln Monument to protect property. And yesterday, there was no security posture at all. Why wouldn't they have expected that to happen? There was no coordination between organizations. No intelligence was shared. As you've all mentioned previously, calls for the National Guard, who was on standby to be activated, never happened. And calls for what we call mutual aid didn't happen. So to suggest that this was a failure is a gross misstatement. I'm hoping that there's going to be an independent review, much like there was done in Charlottesville. And thank God that some people have already resigned, because they should. This was just incredibly unacceptable and unconscionable. And unfortunately, lives were lost.
Mm-hmm. Rick, are you there? There you are.
Here, I think this is one of those questions, and someone asked me this rhetorically yesterday. The obvious disorganization of these folks turned out to be a great blessing. But as a friend of mine, who's a former intelligence person, said, what happens if 60 Al Qaeda or ISIS guys decided they wanted to take over the US Capitol and they were armed? It could have been a bloodbath of the highest order. This is a massive failure in this country. And unfortunately, it's one more thing where this president's followers have shown a deep weakness in the way we're organized, the way we think about things, the way we approach our security. And I think it is just one of those moments where, and you're absolutely right, sir. The fact that the Capitol Police Chief resigned tonight, that should have happened about 5 minutes after this was over. It was a shocking dereliction in my view. And I think I hope we are past the worst of it, but that online chatter on Parler and elsewhere has now shifted to calling the 20th of January the Million Militia March, where they're saying they're coming to DC with their weapons this time. And
they're emboldened.
I think, right. I do think, Tara, I think that's right. I think they're emboldened. I think they feel like they've got one of the things that was floating around in that world today was a rumor that the president was going to blanket pardon everyone who had been involved with this. So this is I think the constable should be higher. Right. I mean, we dodged a bullet, but that doesn't mean the gunfight's over.
Well, Rick, you're absolutely right. And to your point, if this had been a religious or ethnic minority, the response and preparation would have been very different. I wrote an op-ed last month after the election to warn people again about the right-wing extremists that we have in this country. And I said, do we need a building to come down for us to pay attention? Well, in 1995, we had a building come down. And then time elapsed, and then 9/11 happened. We all forgot. Well, here we are again with the same threat. And with all due respect, in October, the FBI's report said the greatest threat to this country is right-wing extremists. A week later, the Department of Homeland Security, Trump's Department of Homeland Security, said the greatest threat to this country are right-wing extremists. And yet yesterday, it was like having a picnic on the lawn as they were being told that we will not concede and that we should now have a call to arms. And they seem surprised. And it's unacceptable.
To that point, to Rick's point, a friend of mine who is a gun enthusiast, and he hangs out with a lot of gun rights folks, and he shoots guns, which is fine. We have guns in our house. I mean, I have no problem with that, lawfully owning guns. But he was saying, right, and he was saying how something similar, that imagine if they were not necessarily Al-Qaeda. What if we have some of these domestic terrorist groups that we're talking about, these militia groups like the Boogaloo movement, the Oath Keepers, who were out there, some of them, and others who are actually trained. They are a lot of ex-military guys and law enforcement folks who do know how to handle themselves with weapons. And they were, the thought of them actually kind of learning from the mistakes of the mob yesterday and becoming more organized. He suggested to me that the inauguration should not go forward in any way, shape, or form, even in a limited way, that there should not be the inauguration on the Capitol steps, that the risk is just too great. Do you agree with that?
I would have to agree with that. And particularly since we're in an era of our pandemic of COVID, there'd be no reason to do that. But I love your question because you point out some very interesting things. Yesterday was a lesson learned for the world. They understood that our nation's capital could be attacked the way it was and compromised in a matter of minutes. The other thing is that people should understand is that as you mentioned, the attacks we've had this year have been, as Rick mentioned, largely unorganized. The plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan and the governor of Virginia, although thwarted, was a group of amateurs who, thank God, they didn't have enough organizational savvy to do it. However, the movement we're talking about is not just our own domestic problem. This is a transnational movement. There's a group called the Base, which ironically enough, the Base in Arabic is Al-Qaeda. They train in this country. They have paramilitary training camps in this country for what they're calling the Second Civil War. There's it's a group called accelerationists. And what they're fighting, and the reason they love this president, is we're going to be a majority country in 2045. They believe we're accelerating toward the bottom of civilization unless they do something. This whole notion is that we have to start to act. The first thing we do is we take care of militants. We go after people who are of color. We go after the LGBTQ community, because if we don't do it now, we're going to lose our country. We're going to lose our standing. And the most common hashtag in their social media is hashtag white genocide. So to your point, I see no reason, if for no other, the fact that it's COVID, we need to have a physical, in-person inauguration.
Rick, what is happening?
No, I just getting some news. But look, there is I think Errol's point is exactly right. We've put ourselves in a position where these groups are in this country. They are not trivial, or they are not just, it's not just for the lulls. They are using tools like Discord and Parler and Gab and other places to organize. And you know, the idea about that white genocide hashtag is something that's really compelling, because one of the things yesterday, people at that rally wearing Camp Auschwitz sweatshirts. People wearing shirts that had the numbers 6MWE, which means 6 million wasn't enough. So if you don't think that these people possess the intent, at least, if not the organization, to do enormous harm to this country, and what's fundamental about them is that they hate the idea of a pluralistic American society. They hate the idea of a propositional country, which said, you know, from almost, and as flawed as our beginning was, the diversity of this country that's gone in over time has meant that whatever generation was hated in that moment, whether it was when my German relatives came here in the 1840s, they were the hated minority. And then when the Italians came, they were the hated minority. And then, you know, the Vietnamese, they were the hated minority, and on and on. Now it's Mexican Americans. No matter what our flaws, there was a propositional nature to this country, especially Civil War and the 14th Amendment, which said if you wanted to be an American and you were here and became an American, bought into the system, that was what you were. These people believe that being an American is defined as being a white Protestant, and it is a dangerous ideology. It is spreading, and I think while not everyone there yesterday embraced that ideology, a meaningful fraction of them that did were certainly apparent in the crowd.
Well, you're absolutely correct. And as you mentioned previously, emboldened by the President of the United States. I mean, let's not forget his inauguration speech. He mentioned American carnage when he was referring to the inner cities being places that were afflicted by crime. A political elite had disregarded them. And we should all remember in my world, we say coincidences take a lot of planning. America First has always been his theme. And as you know, America First was the theme of the KKK. America First was the theme they used to celebrate the centennial. America First was the theme that David Duke used when he ran in 2016. So the dog whistle is no longer a dog whistle, as you all know very well. And this resonates with them. So they have a champion in the White House. And to listen, the two most telling scenes for me yesterday was that African-American security officer who was backed up the stairs by a group carrying a Confederate flag. And outside of the Capitol, they took down the American flag and put up a Trump flag. Those images were powerful. And if we don't prosecute these people to the fullest extent of the law, per the president's executive order he signed in June, then they will use yesterday as a moment in history that will be a trophy for them for the rest of our lives.
Absolutely.
100%.
We said at the same time, Rick. I did not see that image of the flag being replaced with a Trump flag. I had not seen that until you just said it right now. And it sent chills down my spine because our next guest is going to talk about the history of authoritarians. And, this is right out of that playbook. And I just don't know if Americans really understand the danger that Donald Trump's presidency has posed, the damage that he's done, and what we are going to face, because these freaking people aren't going away even after he does and leaves the White House. We have a couple of tweets for you, Dr. Southers. So if you don't mind, we're going to take them so you can answer a couple questions. Let's throw up the first one. Sure. All right. If the reports that off-duty police officers and military members were involved in the riot are correct, 1, how far does the rot go? And 2, how are we supposed to feel safe if even people who are supposed to protect us are joining this insane criminality? That's from Alistair Jones. Okay. Dr. Southers, I mentioned earlier, and a lot of people who watch the show know that I'm married to a federal law enforcement officer and that I'm very pro-law enforcement. The last couple of years have opened my eyes to some very troubling trends in our police departments. This is something that the feds have been tracking for some time, since 9/11. This, infiltrating of folks into these police departments who hold these white nationalist viewpoints. And, friends of mine have suggested that we need to do better screening, better vetting of who these people are. But it appears that there are more sympathizers than we would like to admit. What do you think about what we saw with some of the images yesterday of these Capitol police officers letting them in, taking selfies like, it was just a day at the museum? How much of a problem is this really?
It's a significant problem, and it's a fantastic question from Alistair. First, I'd like to mention that in 2006, the FBI did a study, and the report was finally released by Congress, but it was heavily redacted because it was documenting the infiltration of white supremacists and white nationalists into local law enforcement, particularly by former military members. It came up again in Congress last year, and we're trying to get it unredacted, but it hasn't gone away. I wrote an op-ed in 2016 when the president was running for election, and I talked about how race was the most important extremist violence issue we needed to deal with. I'll just say this. That op-ed went out on Monday. In the op-ed, it mentioned that I was a former FBI agent and a former assistant chief of police. Within 24 hours, someone had decided to do enough research to find out where I lived and did a drive-by on my house.
Wow.
Charlottesville, I'm going to say, is very progressive. The chief in Charlottesville, Dr. Rochelle Brackney, I'm giving her a shout out. She is now their chief. As a department policy, if you are affiliated with a hate group, you cannot apply to her department. That's the kind of reform that we need. By the way, the logo behind me, which says Lewis, it's in the honor of Representative Lewis. It is a national unified database that we are creating at my center at USC that's going to document officers fired for misconduct. Because the other thing that officers do when they get fired is they go to another department. And you're married to a police officer, you know exactly what I mean. They bounce.
Yep.
So we've got to end their careers. So there is a purge that needs to take place. And I'm hearing that before I came on your show this evening, I had a friend who sent a note to me who said, off-duty police officers, military, use their ID to enter the Capitol yesterday as part of the protesters. We have
I saw the same thing.
Case, if that is the case, if that story is validated, those people, first off, absolutely do not need to be either in the military or any law enforcement agency in this country. And furthermore, we need to reconsider how the Capitol Police are trained and their protocols for these kind of things, because this is quite obviously not like law enforcement courtesy, as we all know, is a thing, but this is well beyond that. And
yeah, you don't get that courtesy when you're in the middle of an insurrection riot. Sorry, this isn't getting out of a speeding ticket.
Mm-hmm. We do have some states now that are proposing legislation. I saw it earlier this week, where they believe that social media of officers should be occasionally audited to look for hate speech, misogyny, racist remarks, and they should be addressed. Because unfortunately, these officers are not smart enough to understand sometimes that their social media is out there and they believe they have the liberty to put whatever they want out there. And when they do, they should be removed from the department.
Agreed.
More.
Agreed.
I could not agree more.
Yep. And that's great that you guys are developing that database. That's something that needs to happen. And I was actually frankly surprised to see that there was nothing like that, where I was unaware of that until the George Floyd situation. And it needs to happen, because you can't just go from one department to the other without without consequence when you've been fired from your job. When you have to get a security clearance for federal jobs, these things follow you. So why would that not apply to people who are carrying guns and have to, or protecting people from local police departments?
Thank you so much. LEWIS, by the way, stands for Law Enforcement Work Inquiry System. And our two biggest supporters are Karen Bass and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and they've been great. And we're moving along.
Now that's bipartisan.
Erroll, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Erroll. We'll talk to you again.
Okay.
It's a lot to take in.
Impressive as hell.
Yep.
Yeah, he is impressive.
We could have talked to him all night.
Absolutely.
This is the quality of guests that you get now on the breakdown. It's not just Rick and I going back and forth. We have fabulous guests, and we have another very, very impressive guest coming up. I have interviewed her before on my podcast, and I've read her book, Strongmen. But before we do that, I believe that we have another Lincoln Project ad called Proud Boys.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. Many of you have traveled from all across the nation to be here, and I want to thank you for the extraordinary love. That's what it is. They could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election. I know how you feel. I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We love you. You're very special. That I will totally accept the results of this presidential election if I win.
I just want to give a shout out to Joey and Kate and Ben and Don and Beth in our production shops, who have been just killing it the last 48 hours. They have been driving out content like you can't even believe. Some of the stuff that's coming out tonight and tomorrow is going to pop your eyes out. They have just been absolutely on fire, communicating to the American people. And we've had something like 5 million views on all this stuff in the last 24 hours. And we thought, after Georgia, everything's going to calm down.
I said that to my husband today when he got back from work, and I got home from work. I said, well, if anybody thought that the Lincoln Project wasn't going to have much to do after Inauguration Day, boy, were we all wrong.
Man, it is. And I will say that someone to preview a little something here. There are a lot of people right now that have seen some tweets from Steve Schmidt and Reed and myself today talking about the pressure campaigns to come. The people that enabled and empowered Donald Trump, people that have done this, cabinet, in the media, in the government, in politics, in the Republican Party, in elected office, they know what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. They were well aware. So when you go out after you're in the cabinet now, you try to get, say, a board seat or a speaking gig, Abe is watching. And you'll hear a lot more about this in the coming days and weeks, because we believe that there are many people who are suddenly finding Jesus at the last possible second. This is a deathbed conversion. It's like when General Leclerc and the American and Omar Bradley rolled into Paris in 1944, there were no Nazis there. There were no Vichy there. What? Nazis where? Never heard of them.
Right. Never who?
And the same thing. Well, Hitler, what? And so, all these people in the cabinet suddenly like, oh, I can't take this. Well,
right.
Fuck you. You're 4 years late. Anyway, moving on to our next guest.
Yes, and Lindsey Graham, we're talking to you, Lady G. Our next guest is our next guest is Professor Ruth Ben Giat. She is a professor of history and Italian studies at New York University, where she's an expert on fascism, authoritarian leaders, propaganda, and the threats to democracy around the world. Sounds fitting for what we're living through right now, and how to counter them. Her new book, Strongmen From Mussolini to the Present, is the first to put President Donald Trump in the context of a century of authoritarian leaders. Professor Ben Giat, welcome. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Tara.
So, when I requested to have you on the show tonight, it was before the insurrection, and little did I know that how appropriate this conversation would be, given what happened yesterday. How many boxes does Donald Trump's presidency tick off in the authoritarian playbook?
Unfortunately for us, he ticks them all off. And starting from his personality, which is exactly the same as many of the despots I've studied, his skill at propaganda, his impulsiveness, his need to humiliate people, incitement of violence, and the way his presidency is ending, where he's like having these desperate measures. He's purged, all but the most loyal. All this stuff is straight out of the authoritarian playbook.
In your book, Strongmen, see, I told you, when I say I've read the book, I mean it.
Thank you.
Page 220, you're welcome. Because when I first interviewed you, the book hadn't come out yet, so I was looking forward to it. And on page 222, you say that the authoritarian playbook has no chapter on failure. This is in your chapter on endings. And you say it has no pages on how to deal with becoming a national disgrace. Its discussions of how to control minds and exploit bodies do not extend to the deterioration of the leader's own. That aging and the ebbing of virile powers is difficult for leaders whose entire sense of self is bound up in being revered. A certain authoritarian said, I follow my instincts and I'm never wrong. That was not Donald Trump who said that, for those who are thinking it was Trump. It was Mussolini. And in your book, you make a lot of parallels between Trump and authoritarians. And Mussolini, and that comparison stands out a lot for me because of Mussolini's background, his use of the manipulation of the media, hiring of relatives like his son-in-law to be the foreign minister. Imagine Jared Kushner as a Secretary of State, God help us. But what are some of the areas where Donald Trump is most alarmingly similar to the Mussolinis and Hitlers of the last century?
Well, these are men who often come to office with a criminal record or under investigation. So when they come into politics, they're extremely skilled at seducing people, manipulating people's minds. They know how to speak the language of emotion, like that ad that you showed with Trump talking about love and I feel your pain. All of them are very, very skilled at this. And Trump also is amoral. Everything is a transaction for him. And so this allows him, like Mussolini, to make these alliances with people you might not expect him to ally with. So, for example, you couldn't find two less pious people than Mussolini and Trump, right? They're the most profane, nasty individuals. And Mussolini was a sexual assaulter on a grand scale as well. And these were the people who ended up being proclaimed by religious institutions as, there to save the nation and ruling with divine benediction. So they have a lot of the same talents, And it's very interesting that they're very confident of themselves, and they are the last to know that they are in trouble of being, that their people are turning against them.
Mussolini ended up going over there and working for Hitler for a little while. So I don't know that Donald Trump will end up going to work for Vladimir Putin, but that would be a fitting end to his career. Go ahead, Rick.
Well, I mean, he's got a couple of options. He can go off to and have Jared try to swing a deal where he goes to live in Saudi, or he could go to Trump would not profit and would not thrive in Russia.
Yeah.
But then again, with all the Mussolini parallels, he does end up hanging by his feet and at a gas station somewhere outside of DC.
Oh my God!
And I don't know.
This is an amazing fact. So Mussolini was voted out by his Grand Council in the summer of 1943 because the Allies had landed. And so his people turned against him, the equivalent of McConnell and Pence. And this happened like late at night. And he came to work the next day as though nothing had happened, because he was so living in his bubble of kind of false confidence that he couldn't comprehend that he was out.
I actually made a note of that in your book. I wrote in the margins, because I'm a nerd and I write in the margins, and I wrote, similar to Trump deciding to go play golf and watch Fox News after losing the election, not facing the reality of the fact that he lost the election. So he just decided to check out and create his own reality, and I'm going to play golf. Or today, after an insurrection attempt that he incited, he decides to move forward with awarding presidential medals of freedom in the White House, just like nothing ever happened. It's insane. Go ahead, Rick.
But you're exactly right. That sort of reality bubble that these people create around themselves, where they just pretend nothing's going wrong, and they act as if that the world still revolves around their every whim, until such time. Once again, it's like Gaddafi dying in a ditch, or Mussolini hanging by his feet from a light post, and or Hitler trapped in a bunker hearing Soviet artillery closing in. The ending is ironically always sort of the same. The Ceausescus, the Ceausescus are lined up against a wall and they're reprimanding the firing squad before they're killed. So, I mean, it's in this conceit.
What's super interesting, and I didn't expect to find so many similarities, is that all of them create these, I call them inner sanctums or cocoons. They're governance structures where they surround themselves with sycophants, flatterers, family. As Tara mentioned, sons-in-law are very big through the whole century, lots of sons-in-law, because these people will protect them, and they won't tell them anything they don't want to hear, and they become conspirators. And so they lose touch with reality and they make bad decisions. And so authoritarianism is about mismanagement, chaos, and destruction.
How much?
And go ahead, Tara.
Oh, no problem. I just want, we think about this, and we're having a little bit of fun with this conversation because we've got to lighten it up, because sometimes when you talk about it, it's so heavy to think about. Like, we're literally talking about comparisons, legitimate comparisons between authoritarians like Mussolini, butchers like Mussolini and Hitler, and the current occupant of the White House for only 13 more days. It's just hard to fathom sometimes, but it's scary and it's real. And I think the more historical context and perspective that the American people have, I think there'll be a growing sense of urgency to make sure that we never let this happen again. How much danger do you think our democracy is in this moment, knowing what you know about history?
A huge danger, starting with the fact that this idea that they're going to all come on January 20th. And I agree, there should not be an inauguration. It's way too, dangerous. But it reminds me of the kind of march on Rome that started fascism in 1922. with all these non-state actors, these paramilitary who flooded in, and they wanted to start something, right? But the mechanism is the same. They believed in their leader, they wanted to elevate him, and this is extremely dangerous. So what I see going forward, unfortunately, is an attempt by the right, by the GOP, to make America as unstable as possible, as difficult to govern as possible, perhaps with violent episodes, so that it prepare the way for a new savior and the Republicans to come back and finish the work that Trump has started in an authoritarian key.
So when you heard him say tonight that this is just the beginning,
yes,
in that video, because we only showed a snippet of it, if anybody else wants to torture themselves and watch it, but in that video, he says to his supporters that this is just the beginning. And I would think that is somewhat of a clarion call to these people.
Yeah, it's really scary. And so there, in a way that when he's out of power now, he'll be more unleashed and more able to act as a kind of, to wage the psychological warfare, to egg people on, and just create this, in Italy you call it the strategy of tension. And this is when, in 1970s, you had terrorism. And the idea was to kind of make society so stressed that it provoked a kind of, revolution either, and both the far right and the far left were interested in this, but it was very bad for democracy.
Rick?
I just have to say, I had a very clever friend who's a pretty knowledgeable historian just say to me, Melania is the Eva Braun of Clara Petacci. And I'm proud to say I know all those references.
As do I, and I'm waiting for the couture dress to be delivered to her
Yes.
days before their demise.
I had to put that in the book.
Go ahead, Ruth, explain what we're talking about.
So Hitler retreated to his bunker. And so one of the sad truths of these authoritarians who tell their people that they love them, they actually despise them, right? They couldn't care less about them. So when things go badly, they abandon them. In fact, Trump, I think it was a rally a few months ago, he warned his supporters, if I lose, you'll never see me again. That'll be the end. So, because they despise them. So Hitler, when things were, when the Allies were advancing, the Soviets were advancing, and it was clear the war would be lost, he retreated to his bunker and just gave up and left the Germans to their fate. And he made plans to kill himself, and he also made plans to marry Eva Braun, which he never wanted to marry because he had to be almost married to Germany. He couldn't be seen as having any other loyalty but Germany. And so she had a couture dress delivered under gunfire to the bunker so she could wear it with Ferragamo shoes at her wedding, which was followed by their suicide. So it's very ghoulish tale.
Well, all it's missing is some red Christmas trees, and I guess we would have
there is this interesting ghoulishness, and also Melania, as we found from those tapes that were leaked, or those phone calls, she also, of course, despises the people she's supposed to be serving. Remember, she said, "Why should I care about fucking Christmas?" or something like that.
Right.
And so those red Christmas trees were a big sign. It was like a big FU to the American people with these horror film trees. That was the sign.
Yeah. Right. And the sign literally on the back of her jacket that said, "I don't really care, do you?"
Yeah.
And, and it's clear not only does she despise these people, she despises her own husband. So she has to be probably the most miserable bitch in Washington, D.C. And I can't wait for her to get the hell out of there. And a real woman of class like Dr. Jill Biden to finally become the First Lady of the United States and bring some class and dignity back to that position. Rick?
Absolutely.
We've got a couple of tweets for the professor. Let's see what we got. No criminal action against Trump in the name of healing the divide. What precedent does that set for future administrations? And is Biden correct in that being the politically wise thing to do? Great question. Subtweet Connor.
I actually want to ask Ruth that question because, it's
Ruth?
How should Biden handle this, in the aftermath of this scorched earth that Donald Trump is leaving us? How should Biden handle it? Because some people think he should be tough. Biden's signaling that he's not interested in really going after Trump. What do you think?
I think that because there's the case in the Southern District in New York that is proceeding, it would be great if that proceeded and that was a way that Trump could be prosecuted. I think that doing nothing is not an option. I think that sends the wrong message because it's Trump is, he was impeached, and of course he had the Senate tied around his little fingers, so he was acquitted by them. But I think that it sends a message that to the future Trumps, both family members and others like Holly, that lawlessness is tolerated. And one of the biggest problems, if you've had somebody like Trump in power, and this happened in Italy with Berlusconi, is that corruption becomes normalized and lawlessness becomes glamorized. And so doing that is not an option.
What do we always say? None of this is normal. When I brought Rick up to Harvard to speak to my Harvard class last year, that was the name of that study group. No, none of this is normal. When I brought Rick to speak, because we can't let people get desensitized to what's going on here. That's what happens. That the parallel between Nazi Germany and Hitler's rise, and even with Mussolini and some of the things that Donald Trump was doing, the whole idea of the trains running on time and the populist demands of, we'll get you jobs and, we'll build bridges in Germany and, all of these things, these giveaways to lull people into the desensitized view of the real fascist, horrible stuff that's happening over here.
And one of the reasons I wrote the book was to bust the myth of authoritarianism as efficient and good for business and like law and order, trains run on time. And I wanted to draw back the curtain and say, no, it's chaotic, it's dysfunctional. You know how Trump is hiring and firing everybody all the time? All of them do this. And so it's the most dysfunctional possible mode of government when one man has control. And I wanted to show this to kind of get over these myths that are still very current and prop up these men.
Let's take one more tweet.
Yeah, let's do one more tweet.
The GOP's job now is not to inflame the grievance politics that Trump exploited and that the party has used for the past 50 years. Do you see the party purging these forces, or will it destroy itself and fall into their own civil war? Well, I know for me, I've been warning about this, that if the GOP right now has a decision, they're at a crossroads. And this whole incident yesterday has actually given them an off-ramp if they want to try to salvage what's left of it. I'm not quite sure if they're going to, considering over 100 members still voted yesterday to against the certification of Biden, feeding into this myth of voter fraud. So I'm not confident that the Republican Party is going to be able to right the ship. But Rick, did you want to say something about that?
Everybody that we should always hesitate to make comparisons between Trump and Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler had an attention span longer than a gnat and normal-sized hands. Other than that, proceed.
Ruth?
But one of the interesting things that the history gives us is that shows up the actual huge achievement of Trump in domesticating the GOP is that a lot of these other leaders either created their own parties, like Mussolini and Berlusconi, or were the heads of those parties for a very long time before they came to power, like Hitler and others. Donald Trump comes in from outside, and in the space of 4 years, he completely domesticates the GOP and makes it into his personal tool. And this is quite extraordinary and quite unusual outside of like a one-party state, a classic dictatorship. So it's not surprising to me that these people stuck with him through thick and thin until the very end. And I'm not sure how many of them will defect enough. I don't know if there'll be a split in the party. But I can tell you that parties that back authoritarians don't normally do very well after those people leave.
That's right.
They're like an earthquake, and they arrive and they exploit existing fissures and weaknesses, but they leave the landscape different than when they came.
Well,
contemporary examples of that. You had
right.
Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath Party, which was an absolutely hermetic, disciplined authoritarian state, and you had Libya with Gaddafi, which had a similar characteristic. And both nations in the intervening years since the deaths of those men have been in chaos, because if you have one generation that becomes accustomed to authoritarianism, they lose the habit of democracy. They lose the habit of civic engagement in the way that we think of it. And so it's it's been a fascinating night to have you on, Ruth, because we really are at a moment where we're looking at a Y in the road, a fork in the road here, as to which way this country is going to go in the next 13 days.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. I just enjoyed it.
Everybody, check out her book, Strong Men. It is really, really, really good. And to Rick's point, that's why Ronald Reagan's words about freedom is only one generation away from being lost. It has to be fought for, because that's true. And we're watching that play out right now. Heed Reagan's warning. And I suggest people also Google Vichy Republicans and the Know Nothing Party and what happened to them, and the similarities to what the Republicans are doing right now. And the Whigs. Correct. Most people know about the Whigs, but they don't know that there was really a Know Nothing Party and what happened in 1854 with them. Oh my goodness. Well, man, it's been a very erudite evening
tonight,
Rick Wilson.
Tara. Hell of a show tonight, Tara. And I got
appreciate it.
My buddy's Carla Petacci joke in there. So
yes,
by the way, everybody, Carla Petacci was Mussolini's mistress, who was hanged by the feet until dead alongside of Mussolini. So there you have it.
She was his one of many, but she was the one who was with him to the very end.
I guess it's one of those rules in life: never be the mistress of a dictator on the last week of his reign.
Right, it's not going to end well for you. At least
you're going to hear him on the phone at some point saying, "The third best mistress into the pain."
Oh my goodness. Well, on that note, we're going to end the evening with our call to action. First, I want to congratulate Georgia. And that's kind of been swept under the rug. It was huge news this week because, Democrats are taking over the Senate, which has huge implications, and even more so now after what we saw take place this week. But I just think it's important that we realize that no later than January 22nd, Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff will be seated as the next senators in Georgia. History making for both of them. And there will be a new Senate Majority Leader. Obviously, we haven't had time to really process that, but I guarantee you, as that date approaches, we will have plenty to make fun of Mitch McConnell with before then, as he exits as the majority. Right. So don't worry about that. So I just wanted again to say congratulations to Georgia. Thank you for bringing it home. And also another big thank you to Nate Nesbitt and all the hard work that he did for us, the Lincoln Project on the ground there and our partners on the ground. Kudos to you guys. And one last thing also, our call to action. Where is it? We have this really cool website. Oh, here it is. Yes, there we go. So our call to action tonight, we're going to urge folks who are pissed off about what happened. And if you are very upset, we keep saying, make a note of who your congressman was. And if they were involved in this at all, we're going to make sure that they don't have that seat in 2022. Well, there's a cool new website out there, and it's called Phone to Action. It makes it easier for you to contact your elected officials. It's a great resource, and you can tell them that Donald Trump's behavior is inexcusable. The incitement that they were apparently okay with is un-American, and that you're not going to tolerate it, and they will face consequences at the ballot box as a result of it. So that's the website, Phone to Action. Check it out and tell them that Donald Trump needs to be immediately removed. We saw Congresswoman Speier earlier say that she's introduced a couple of things there to get him out. We know that Nancy Pelosi has talked about possible reintroduction of impeachment articles, which they don't have to go through the whole months of debate and committee hearings and all that. That is not necessary. The Speaker of the House has control over this. She can bring it to a vote tonight, and then it goes over to the Senate. And that's up to Mitch McConnell about what he wants to do. But until he is no longer Senate Majority Leader, I'm not sure we'll get through with that. But regardless, contact your members and tell them how you feel about it. And on that note, we'd like to thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sending in your questions. And we will see you next week on Tuesday and Thursday, 9 p.m., right back here live. Stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you then.
I have loved being a judge. But to serve as Attorney General at this critical time, to lead the more than 113,000 dedicated men and women who work at the department to ensure the rule of law, is a calling I am honored and eager to answer. As everyone who watched yesterday's events in Washington now understands, if they did not understand before, the rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy. The essence of the rule of law is that like cases are treated alike, that there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, one rule for friends, another for foes, one rule for the powerful, another for the powerless, one rule for the rich, and another for the poor, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity. and the essence of its great corollary, equal justice under law, is that all citizens are protected in the exercise of their civil rights. Those ideals have animated the Department of Justice since the very moment of its inception. President-elect Biden understands this. As he said today, and as he has publicly said before, quote, "It's not my Justice Department, it's the people's Justice Department." He promised that the person he chose to lead the department would have the, quote, "independent capacity to decide who gets prosecuted and who doesn't." Vice President-elect Harris has also publicly stated, quote, "Any decision coming out of the Justice Department should be based on facts, it should be based on the law, it should not be based on politics, period." I could not agree more. And I would not have agreed to be considered for Attorney General under any other conditions. So thank you both for giving me the opportunity to serve.